Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Yesterday, a former employee of Cambridge Analytica told MPs that far more than 87 million people may have had their Facebook data harvested by the company. She also said she had specific concerns of legality about the working practices of the Leave UK campaign founded by Aaron Banks. The Culture and Media Committee has asked Cambridge Analytica's CEO, Alexander Nix, to appear to address inconsistencies in his earlier evidence, but he has refused. So where does that leave us? Joining me to discuss this are Jamie Bartlett, who's Director of the Centre for Analysis of Social Media and the author of a new book, praised by the Home Secretary no less, The People versus Tech. And Damien Collins is the chair of the Digital Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. Welcome to you both. I mean, Jamie, what looks like a very prescient title, the People versus Tech. I mean, is that what's happening, that these wonderful devices and things that we could do are now being used against us, the people?
Yeah, and against democracy in a sense, and that's the sort of argument, and that to me is the bigger story here, just beyond this specific committee, which is the way that digital technology is just little by little, in various ways, sort of undermining important parts of our democracy. Not necessarily intentionally, but in a sense we have this democracy that was built in one time, and suddenly we have this new technology that doesn't really follow the rules, or there aren't any rules for it to follow, from a very different time.
I mean, how's it doing? Give us some examples.
Well, I mean, if you talk about the election, which is obviously the US election and Brexit as well, we have laws that govern the extent to which certain adverts on TV or pamphlets and publications can be monitored and regulated so that we can check they're roughly accurate and how much is being spent on them. That's a really important way that we trust the elections that we have. But new types of very targeted, micro-targeting, big data analysis of people that gets you right down through social media to target very small numbers of people often flies under the regulator's radar. And you can't monitor easily whether what you're being served up is true or a complete fantasy.
David Collins, I mean, you as a politician are trying to fight back against this. Can you beat or tame tech?
Yes, we can. I think we have to have better rules on the transparency of information people see online, understanding why they're seeing the content they are, why it's being shared with them, and to make it harder for bad actors to target people through the data footprints they leave when they're online. I think there are two big concerns for us out of the work we've done so far, particularly looking at big tech companies like Facebook, and that is, I think, understanding why they gather so much data about us, maybe a lot more than we realised that they did. And also that there's been a vulnerability around that data as well. It's been too easy.
I mean, there is a problem, because in one sense, big data can be extremely useful, to everybody. I mean, I bet those people caught up in Windrush wish there was big data about the time that they'd spent in the UK, for example.
Indeed, but there's a sort of, I think people accept there's a certain transactional relationship. If I'm using a service that I value and it's collecting data about me to improve that service, that I'm quite happy with that transaction. But if actually someone else can take that data and use it for a purpose I would not support or intend, would have consented for my data being given in that way, then I would question it. I think people question, why is it that Facebook keep records of all your phone calls and text messages? Why was it that Facebook developer apps were allowed to take not just your data, but the data of all your friends as well? I think that's what people question.
I mean, they do it because they can make money out of it.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there's the basic business model of a lot of these tech firms essentially is to collect as much information as possible, because the more they can get about you, the better they can target adverts at you. It really is as simple as that. And that's why I don't think this is going to stop. Because they need to build more and more detailed profiles of people. It makes perfect sense for their business. And in many ways, then, people being targeted with such emotional, personal messaging sort of undermines the sense of a big public sphere where we're all getting the same messages.
Yeah, but you see, there are those people who say that this is just a transformational phrase, that when we get there, we won't need people like Damien Collins, because we'll be able to take decisions collectively online without politicians.
I mean, that's ridiculous, isn't it? But that is part of
that's part
of the sort of techno-utopian vision that we can get rid of politics, but we cannot and we must not, which is why I've been really enjoying watching Damien and the committee grill some of the techies, because that's really what's needed. We need to hold these companies to democratic account.
And also, what we've seen in the political sphere is it's far too easy for people to game the system, to actually swamp social media with highly partial, highly partisan news and information, and through that try and persuade people that their very narrow views reflect broader opinion. So in your brave new world, the trouble we'd have at the moment is that wouldn't be people making perfect decisions based on perfect information, but a swarm of information skewing debate.
But do you think it is really changing the outcome, political outcomes? That's the key question, isn't it? Because there's always been all sorts of information available to people. I agree it's on a much bigger scale now. But
I think the difference is we're moving to a world where people no longer consume news from a curated space through watching a programme or reading a website or a news website or a publication. They're seeing it chunk by chunk, distributed them through the internet. They don't understand why they're receiving what they're receiving, and they don't understand that as they engage with it, what they see is not more opinion, they see more of the same opinion over and over again. And I think there's no doubt that is driving partisanship and polarisation in our political debate.
Yeah, and it's the thing about this sort of idea that we're in little echo chambers of like-minded people. I think there's more to it than that. I mean, I'm surrounded by people on the internet who don't agree with what I think. But the problem is I'm very quick to dismiss them as fools and morons and dangerous demagogues. And so the very nature of sort of sharp, rapid internet communication, it's not just that you don't see opinions that are different to yours, you don't engage with them properly, and I think that's also what's driving us apart.
So what controls do we need?
Well, I mean, the more regulation over during election time would be very important, because the more we get targeted messaging, the more we're pushed into these smaller boxes. But in the end as well, it's down to us. I mean, us citizens do need to recognise that we have a responsibility to uphold a certain level of decorum online, the way we talk politically, to try to respect that other people may have different opinions to us, but that doesn't make them silly or completely misguided. So all of us can change the political culture on.
I mean, there are those who say that, well, if you just said people own their own information and you made the big platforms responsible as publishers for content, that would sort it out.
It would sort out some of it possibly, but of course, the minute they are fully responsible as publishers, you'll see a very, very different type of social media, because it will have to probably be paid for. And I think in the end, there is a possibility that is where we are heading, because data in exchange for free services, I think in a lot of ways does drive against the basic democratic urge for compromise and for listening to other people.
I think there has to be some area of responsibility, though, around what is purely fake news and information. This term gets used a lot, but there are things that are clear lies. And I think in the next few years, we'll move more and more into the space of much more sophisticated, what they call augmented reality. So fake video of people giving speeches they never gave, making remarks at fringe events that are maybe inflammatory, and they could circulate virally online and be around the world before anyone can prove that
those
it's
little
not
people
true.
make with a photograph and a quotation of something someone never said.
No, worse than that, actually. Or actually moving video. Or, I mean, there was this also with what someone could do now with augmented reality in terms of speech. The Times commissioned a recording of President Kennedy giving the speech he would have given if he hadn't been shot in Dallas, with using his voice. Now, that at the moment is done, but still a little bit crude. In the next few years, those things will be seamless.
And do you get the sense now, I mean, you were regarded a bit of as a Don Quixote when you sort of set out on this campaign. Do you get the sense now that the government is absolutely plugged into what you're doing?
Absolutely. I think the last few weeks have been a real moment in time where our knowledge and awareness of the issues has risen dramatically. I think that's the case across Parliament. And it's happened at a time as well when we're passing the new data protection laws. I think one of the things that I really hope will come from this process is we'll give our independent regulators much more power to make sure that the big tech companies are abiding by the laws. And what I would like to see is giving the Information Commissioner in particular the power to go behind the curtain, to go into the tech companies, look at the way the algorithms work, look at the way they protect data to make sure they're complying with the law. Because so far, we've largely been in a situation where we take their word for it that they do without the power to really check, and that's got to change.
OK, thank you both very much indeed for joining me. Jamie's book, The People versus Tech.
Well, the Culture Secretary, Matt Hancock, has announced an extra £15 million to help bolster cyber security amongst Commonwealth nations. He's also the minister investigating Facebook's conduct in the UK following the data harvesting scandal exposed by this programme. Earlier, our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, sat down with him and asked whether his threat to bring in extra regulation really had any teeth.
More than 2 billion people use Facebook. You talked tough on regulation last week, but isn't the reality that you cannot regulate Facebook? They are too big.
Well, I fundamentally disagree with this argument that's been run for some time, that just because these global social media giants are huge, we can't regulate them if necessary. The big picture is that the times have changed for Facebook. This old idea that, oh, they're global, so no one country can regulate them. Rubbish!
But hasn't that bolted, though? Hasn't that horse bolted?
How do you mean?
Well, I mean, it's just, how do you rein that giant in when they have two...
Go over there, there's a House of Commons, and we pass laws, and then people abide by the laws. If in the future Facebook breaks the new, stronger data protection rules, they could be fined over £1 billion. So
is that what you told them last week?
I've been very clear about that.
Was that the big threat to them last week? Because it wasn't clear what you'd said to them, and in fact, if they'd given you any assurances, real concrete assurances other than words, in return.
Yes, I sought assurances from Facebook that they will comply with the new rules that are coming into force next month.
The big scandal, obviously, is the data privacy issue here, and there's not much you can do about that, is there?
I think that the era in which we asked nicely and had to trust the big social media companies to look after our data safely, I think that era where we simply have to trust them is over.
Culture Minister Matt Hancock.